was a recurring dream in which the sense of perception was non-localized to such a degree that it's hard to describe, because I was stone, I was rock, I was a mountain, I was not a living being. But for me, it's very much an open space, for people to express their views and their practice. It can be from a more academic perspective, a very dry perspective. It could be from a purely experiential and knee deep, kind of like, I love that. I very much love that. And for me, part of the fun was always to devise these or come up with these themes.
Welcome to the Spirit Box podcast. For episode number 83, we welcome Gabriel McCaughry. Gabriel is an author, a magical practitioner, and founder of Anathema Publishing. In this show, we get into Gabriel's background, the interesting crooked path that led him to found Anathema Publishing. We discuss the Pillars periodical and its most recently released volume, A Wayfarers Hearth, of which I'm a proud contributor. It's a collection of stories of holy pilgrimages, transformative journeys, and revelatory voyages. A Wayfarer's Heart sets out to share the tales of those who have been deeply affected in esoteric ways by our travels to other lands, who have had their perceptions altered through cultural immersion, through being confronted with our own fears and prejudices. For those who have had our eyes pried open, our inner selves irreversibly changed. It's a wonderful collection and one we will discuss today. You'll find the link to the book in the show notes below, so do pick yourself up a copy before it sells out. Now, in the Plus show, we'll also discuss in further depth how the themes of the Pillars projects often become the theme of Gabriel's year. We also go into the challenges of distracting social media and how we're living in a meaning-saturated field, and how recognizing this is important, and that recognition did inform the Pillars project. Now, in a break from tradition, there are going to be some changes happening in the Patreon, in the podcast Patreon, as I'm reducing it to one tier only. That tier is Ba. The Ankh tier will be closing at the end of the month, and Ka will be closing at the end of February. And a word of advice to anybody who's thinking about setting up a Patreon: pick good tier names at the start. It'll make a difference, trust me. If you'd like to support the show, then come and join the Patreon, as I have a packed schedule with some amazing guests booked across spring. And it's really one you don't want to miss. If Patreon isn't your thing, then check out my Linktree for other ways to support, like buying me a book. Now that's my e-begging out of the way. Let's get into it. Gabriel McCaughry, you're very welcome to the Spirit Box. Lovely to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Darryl.
No problem at all. So to get the show on the road, would you give the listeners just an introduction into yourself and your work?
Yeah, well, my name is Gabriel McCaughry. We've already established I am the owner, founder, and pretty much sole employee of Anathema Publishing. However, I'm not doing everything on my own. Of course, I have like a very small team of people that helps me on a contractual basis, I guess, semi-regularly. And as for myself, well, I'm, like we discussed it prior to the show, but my family name is, of course, Irish, but I'm not that close to the Irish side of the family, unfortunately. And here in Quebec, the family actually only speaks French now. So therefore, English is my second language, as you can tell from the accent, of course. And sometimes I will stumble on words, and I deeply apologize for that. It is the way it is, because I always preface saying this, not because people don't know by now, like a lot of people who do follow my work, they're aware of that. But I guess it's always a challenge for me to be able to express myself properly in a language that I do not fully master, which is doubly odd if you take under consideration that I run an English-based, company. But my written English and even experience as an editor now is much better with the written word than it is speaking it, right? Nevertheless, I am currently 41-year-old man, and I wouldn't be able to say that I've planned to become like a publisher, or that was a long time dream of mine or something like that. However, I've always been very fond of good literature and you know, beautiful books, I guess, as long as I can remember, actually. But yeah, initially I was way more of a, I guess, rebellious spirit, and I was, you know, like I had many phases. I realized that I had like my the crooked path, so to speak, of my life was not one into like a single-minded kind of like obsession or passion that I followed. Everything that has to do with the arts in general is very intriguing to me, because I've always been the creator type, I guess. And whenever something seems very interesting to me or fascinating, I cannot stand on the wayside and kind of like just observe what's being made in the world. I kind of need to, you know, get my hand dirty and try it for myself. That early on led to when I was a teenager, I guess, going into graphic design and such, and also studying literature for a little while, just to get a better grasp of the language, and, you know, just in order to write better lyrics, actually, because at the time I was, of course, in a garage band, and, you know, we were just starting out, you know, and then, you know, yeah, I've been part of bands since like 15 years old or something like that. Released my first CD when I was around 19, in 1999. So that's a while back now. And yeah, I've been part of various bands through the years. Some of them with a various degree of quote unquote success in the underground. One of them actually enough so that I could live off it. You know, well, and I mean live, you know, survive, I guess. But you know, tour. Most of the year, I'd say like 150 shows minimum a year for a good while there, mostly North America. I wish I could have done Europe and Russia and all that good stuff, but as it so happened, that particular band, Ion Dissonance, you know, continued after I left the band, and afterward they were able to, you know, tour Europe and these other cool places. But it doesn't matter. It was very much like a willful decision on my part. And after that, yeah, I've been part of music bands for the better part of my 20s and my 30s. But when I came back to Montreal, kind of like, and try to settle down, I went back to the only diploma that I have to work with, and I was in graphic design. So I quickly found a job at a local cultural newspaper. Worked there for a little while, and then moved to probably Montreal's biggest newspaper. And then I worked there for a good 10 years. And very like kind of like getting quite high in the ranks over there, directing entire teams of people. And that kind of gave me a boost of confidence when it comes to managing larger scale projects. But on the side, this company was taking the digital turn, right? It was around the time, like if you can recall, that the New York Times, for instance, were making that huge shift to online platforms only, or tablets, you know, like iPads and whatnot. And the newspaper I was working at was aiming to do the exact same thing. And to me, that was very disheartening, because before I was very much, I don't know, there was a part of me that was very proud to work at this institution, like the oldest francophone newspaper in North America, La Presse, you know, in Montreal. And it had a solid reputation as a news outlet and all that. And just the cheapened version of like an interactive kind of like a tablet only experience, to me, was not satisfactory at all. Not only that, but they wanted to change every graphic designer who by trade are trained pre-press, and have to do with the printed media, into basically programmers. And I do remember when I was studying graphic design and programming a bit at the time, when it was brand new, and I could have probably made a fortune doing this, I realized pretty quickly how I loaded, absolutely disgusted by programming, and just I still work behind a computer, but let's just say I use a computer. I don't want to know how it operates in the back. And my mind doesn't function in that very logical space. Like I'm way more into an artistic dreamer, if you will. So yeah, one thing led to another, and we'll get to the interesting part for your listeners, I guess. But how I got to develop like a personal practice, right? When I mean by practice, of course, a magical practice, if you want to call it this way. Enough so, yet again, because I had an interest into reading the literature and collecting the books for quite some time, and it wasn't enough anymore. Like I needed to experience what was written, and what the hell that was talking about, and I started like writing on my own, mostly notes, mostly personal notes, and journaling my experiences as I traveled through the Goetia and that type of stuff. Eventually that led me to publish a few pieces in other underground publishers, like small publishing presses that I was already collecting their material. And through various circumstances, of course, and a certain calling, and a certain travel. So we'll get to that, but a certain travel experience. That's where the entirety of not just participating to other people's project, but this grand vision of Anathema Publishing came to mind, and I knew for some reason that this was going to change my life, and that it was not just like a neat idea. I don't know how to say it otherwise. It was like I knew from the get-go it was a life-altering idea. But I had no idea how to start a business. I never had done this before. I was pretty, scared in a certain way, terrified that even though I would start this, it would just be like a passion project like any other. But, is there a way to make a living doing this? Like I had no idea, right? All I knew is that I had something to bring to the table, and I would have yet to see how it would manifest. And that single-minded kind of vision led me to register the company, kind of like start doing the basic paperworks. And I look at my finances and I was like, okay, yeah, I have enough money on the side. Well, funny enough, yeah, I should say, because we're going to get back on this, but through traveling came the idea of, or at least that's where everything crystallized in my mind, to start Anathema Publishing. But I was saving for another extremely, a great travel plan, so to speak, or kind of like a long, several months kind of travel. I was already saving for that when the decision to use that money instead to start the company and invest into say my first project came about. So I had to make a decision that time around to forgo actually not going and do that travel idea. And at the time I was traveling way more anyway. So I decided, I was like, okay, I'm just going to skip, this travel, and I'm going to start my company instead. And that's basically the gist of it, I guess. I don't know if that answered your question, because describing myself, I mean, yeah, complicated, because, like the complexity of beingness aside is the fact that I'm trying as much as I can usually not to define myself by just like the plethora of experiences that I did, or, the kind of t-shirts that I'm wearing that day, or the fact that I would have kids or not. And, like these are, they're easy for conversational purposes, but I'm trying to get at the root of what makes me tick and whatnot. And it's very difficult to answer, I guess.
No, yeah, absolutely is. And we definitely have to move past the superficial elements like our clothing. Otherwise, I'd have to explain my shit jumper, with cold. Cold. That's all.
There you go. Like, I'm wearing this because it's pretty cold too. Yeah, in the basement.
But I do. what I really like to ask you is about, your impetus to start a magical practice, and
Oh.
and where that came from. Were there any, say, early childhood experiences, that pointed you that way?
Yes, quite a few. And again, that's always a question that is it's a question often asked to people who have like a magical or an esoteric practice, and then of course whomever is bound to answer this has taken the time to kind of like go back in the rabbit hole of, again, experiential kind of like waymark, and kind of like settle for one, right? As in like, well, I have to answer something. And then that something I feel is very fleeting and vague, because if I narrow it down to one thing, I'm making a mistake, and it's probably not even that. But, let's just, for the sake of argument, there's a couple of like experiences. That I could easily dismiss as being just an over imagination of a child who was literally, I was at the time when I was a child, very, very shy and very much into my imaginative world, and extremely taken by fantastical elements, and literature and all of that, but also traumatized for a couple of good reasons. But parts of my childhood was very, very, very hard. Not going into any details, but I guess that informed this kind of like mix of fire and water, or fire and oil, I would say, at the time, that led me to a very rebellious personality type, I guess, and having been raised into a very loose Catholic household, which with Sunday kind of like not going to church every Sunday, but these theological courses for children on the Sundays and whatnot. What always like what I always refer to, and that's very funny because it did happen, is as soon as we were old enough to start studying the Bible just a little bit, and my mother was not a hardcore a Christian either, but she had her very Christian values, and they were very important to be respected in the house, I guess. And whenever we would take the road and she would drive, she would say like, thank the angel that we're going to be okay. And so we had to do this little prayer thing. It was pretty funny. But yeah, I very early on when I started reading the Bible, even the passages that were, say, okay for children, like I was just like awestruck by the amount of very harsh things that are described in there, or very harsh judgmental tone, and just plain violent also, or it can kind of like teachings, I guess. And of course, when you're young, you don't take anything else beside face value, or, first level, type of understanding and interpretation. And well, at one point, I even remember I made a presentation in front of my schoolmates for class, kind of like, and I had underlined all the passages that were extremely violent in the Bible. And that was my presentation, to which I actually did not get a good note. The teacher was not happy. I had done that. But yeah, it was so very early on, I was kind of like against it. And I set myself and it was really weird too, because for some reason, and I might be confused as to which happened first, but I remember I had a phase wherein I was extremely against it. And then at one point I was like, yes, but and that was very much true from even the beginning. I was very much against, quote unquote, the evils of the world, or injustice, or what I would perceive as being ugly in the world, or like the ugliness of or, dukkha, like the suffering, I guess, which I had no idea, but the whole suffering of human experience and what I was living on a personal side led me to kind of, at one point I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to live for my namesake, which is, the strength of God, like the might of God, Giborel, the Gabriel. And that for a while, I thought I thought that might have been it. And I guess as when I become even more of a rebellious or antinomian little kid, I just what the church represented. And it was at the time, I remember, like, the newspaper were filled with priests molesting kids, and so all that kind of like gave me a slap in the face. And no matter how many people were like, well, yeah, but not everybody's like that, I was like, yeah, but it's just enough so that you're still endorsing to a certain degree an institution that hides its pedophile, and give them a sweet retreat somewhere, like, instead of like going to court and facing justice. So for me, I guess that's it doesn't answer your question per se, but that frame of mind really informed my imagination, really informed my dreams and everything. And I believe, like, the weirdest experience I had for a while was a recurring dream that I had. And it was a recurring dream in which the sense of perception was non-localized to such a degree that I explained it before in a few interviews, but I'm not sure if people would have heard it before. But it's hard to describe, because I was stone, I was rock, I was a mountain. I was not a living being per se in the, I guess, typical sense of the term. There was no sense of trying to find your organs or your members, like your extensions. There was no eyes to which you could see, but then again, I could see everything as being rock. It was very hard because I was kind of like everywhere at the time, and I could sense my roots being so deep into the earth, and I could sense in a three or even 4-dimensional manner me being recesses and caves, and I could see in 360 within that cave, as if that was kind of like a hole inside of me, and I could travel to different places, pretty much almost in a Gurdjieff manner, wherein you would play with the machine and kind of like in a non-localized manner, kind of throw perception to stick onto other parts of yourself, right? Or outside yourself. As you would say when you're astral traveling, but that was outside even any type of human form. It was like a new experience altogether. And it felt a retrograde experience, not into a past life, not into a parallel life, literally within an alchemical transformation that had taken maybe lifetimes over to kind of like of transfiguration from rock to beingness. Of course, at the time, I didn't go that far into the analysis of it, right? It just seemed like the weirdest fucking thing to try to describe and to dream about on a recurring basis. And that dream, I wrote it down. It stuck with me. It got more complex as the various iterations of it, if you will. And eventually, fast forward a few years, I'm doing music, I'm doing metal. I'm going, of course, because of my rebellious aspect, because of the fact that I had a pretty violent background to a certain degree, I went into the very extremes of the music, which actually, even though, again, at surface level might seem like a bad thing, really it was a lifesaver for me, because it was an outlet of creative endeavor, even though it really explored the darkest side of self and what Jung would call, the shadow work, but it very much true that I started discovering how low I could get, literally. And also because I was conflating the art and that music with my lifestyle and my beingness, as being like this one pool of negative emotions and energy going forward. Of course, like any fire or Negretto stage, of alchemy, that burned real quick, in the long scheme of things. It very much kind of like it was a brazier, a very strong one, but it burned a lot of impurities, actually. And it really made me turn on a new page in my life and be like, well, I'm done with this now. And I knew myself within the most extremes of these expressions. But then again, it was funny to think about the fact that one of the first dreams that I could think about of an esoteric nature then afterward, what became the most important single phase of my life, even within my friends of the day, we used to call our black metal phase, or, and the black metal, we all know in alchemy, again, has a strong significance, being the prima materia, of course, or something like that. And that also made me kind of smile. It's just a coincidence, basically, but it was a funny one nonetheless. And through these associations, I realized how fond I was of symbolism. So I was looking at the world in a symbolic manner that, independent of what I was doing. And I guess at some point, I just realized that the initial impulse for me to be against any religion was misfounded and misguided to the utmost. And of course, that there must be a reason why these are practiced. These are there to stay. I just hadn't found a way to look at them in a deeper manner. And that's where I started just reading about esoteric topics, plural, right? And like everybody else, not knowing exactly where to start and how to approach this. And developing, as per developing a practice per se, I guess it's when I stumble upon the work of Robert Cochrane, of traditional craft, like of the clan of Tubal Cain in the UK. The old Cochraneite, I don't know if that would be correct, but Cochrane derived, tradition of traditional craft, and also, when I stumbled upon the beauty of the books of Azothia, for instance, of Andrew Chumley, and Zoanon, 3 Hands Press, of course, like Ouroboros Press, of course, I started following very early on because I was a fan of Joseph Uccello's amazing typographical work, because I'm a graphic designer and typographer as well. So for me, that guy was like so on point. So, and of course, he was working all the time with the Ouroboros Press. So I started buying these books as well. Ixasar at the time, because I was still at the time very interested into the very dark aspects of theology, I guess, or theistic Satanism and whatnot, Luciferianism, all that good stuff. But at the time, I was very much like taken still by these imageries. It kind of was a direct continuation of whatever I was exploring with the music. That changed through the years, of course, or refined, let's say, like it got more refined at the time as time went on. But, reading these, that's where I was like, well, there's too much incredible material, for me not to try. So the first approaches were very much syncretic. It was pretty much a hodgepodge, like mixing pot, of so many elements. But I knew that as far as like where my heart resided, or what I resonated most with, was not the grimoire tradition per se, even though like I was very much adamant that I should do rituals. All right. So very early on, I started devising my own way of going about ritual, strongly influenced though by different traditions. But it didn't dawn on me that there was an importance to hold like a certain tradition over another. I still had like the entire mentality of a guy who was rejecting religion outright, right? And not so long ago. But it felt like having a daily practice. It felt like going deeper into meditative, or contemplative modes, dedicating a place within my house or apartment at the time. My first ritual space, if you want to call it that, because it was very funny when you think about it. It was just like a home office, a tiny room. And I had roommates back then, and my roommate's girlfriend and my girlfriend was coming over all the time. So there was no such way. There was no way I could have afforded even like dedicating an entire room to spiritual practice. I had my home office because I needed a home office. So I had a small space with a computer and a couch. And whenever I needed to do like a more elaborate ritual, I would do like the utmost smallest circle you could have, like maybe 6 feet across or something like that. and I would like take everything out of the room. I would put everything like in the like on the corridors and everywhere else. And then my then roommate, my cousin, was like, okay, Gabriel's there for a couple of hours, or like, so he knew not to disturb me or something like that. Actually, I spent days sometimes where he would just not see me because I would do rituals on like all around the clock, basically just sleeping there, waking up, and then doing more rituals. And then after a few days, I would just come out completely drenched in sweat and just like, and he had heard weird stuff, and he was like, I don't know, man, I'm trying to play PlayStation right now. I don't like it. So it was very funny. Anyway, so we had a cool dynamic. I remember when I had like revelations of barbarous tongue names and stuff like that, and kind of a trance-induced kind of revelation. I would come out complete like a fucking madman, in the living room and start speaking in tongues to him, like of whatever that entailed. And he would look at me being like, holy fucking shit, like why, and
amazing.
Yeah. And in that little room, I remember, because, like taking everything out was always kind of problematic for bigger rituals, I guess. I had like painted black the entirety of the little, what's the word in English? Where you put your clothes. A cupboard? No.
Yeah, the closet. The closet.
Closet. There you go. Yeah, some small closet space. All right. That again, I had removed everything, and it was a very kind of like narrow. I could barely fit in it, and kind of small. And I had like a small altar in there, and I would just sit like within that closet for like hours, just meditating or focusing on a certain element, doing visualization work or something like that. So yeah, and funny enough, well, again, like that might have to do with more superstition than everything else. But when I did leave and eventually relinquished my room to the then girlfriend of my cousin, and they both lived in the apartment, just the two of them, that room had no purpose initially. So they made it kind of like a guest bedroom or of sort, but it was mostly like a video game room too. Like both of them were big gamers. They would go and play video games in that room. And they told me that whenever they would, like the attraction to that black closet was so much and so disruptive. And whenever they were inside that room, they were so ill at ease that they were like, it was basically a ghost space. We would never go in that place because we would not like the vibe in it. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Might have left a few things open. I don't know. It was really weird like that. But yeah, at the time I was dabbling with pretty dangerous stuff to a certain extent, and not being careful sometimes. I've paid my fair share of dues, whether it be psychological or whatnot. I don't see a distinction in any of that anyway.
Sure.
But experientially, I it took me a while to kind of like balance aspect of my life, and also change a lot of things.
Right.
But it is still the space wherein I first started laying down the foundation for my book, Ororai, that I would release like 10 years after that, but it was journaling these experiences, and sometimes just if I had like a particular interesting contemplative session, I would just go and write poetry, or try to anyway. Sometimes I would write them in French and try to find a nifty or interesting way to translate them myself. And yeah, that's pretty much how I started. But Anathema, we'll get to that. But when I started Anathema, I guess it propelled everything forward in kind of an extrapolated manner, like very quickly. And it solidified a lot of my practice and changed a lot of things as well. So
awesome, thank you. I wonder what's happening in that room now.
Fun stuff.
So I wanted to kind of bring things forward a bit, and you've got the Anathema as set up and established, and they're beautiful books. I know I've said this to you a few times, but
Thank you.
I'm hugely proud to be part of your recent project with the Wayfarers Hearth in part of the Pillars series. So two questions. So the first one is, what's the inspiration and kind of creative goal with the Pillars pieces, and then the second one is the Wayfarers Hearth. Where did you get that? What did you want to explain?
All right. Oh, yeah. Pillars in general there was certainly a very planned function for it to begin with. Of course, it took a life on its own afterward, but to begin with, independent of the grand vision for the series, it was literally the first project I've ever worked on for Anathema. So it wasn't as if like it would have been nonsensical and maybe pompous of me to say that, oh, everything was laid, perfectly. And, that's not at all how things operated. Is basically the fact that I myself, well, that I always have a hard time, but as a writer or as an author, because I don't plainly consider myself to be an author or a writer per se. I believe a writer for me is somebody who's consistently doing it either professionally or at least as a hobby, but on a consistent basis. And an author is somebody who's, yes, published at one point. That doesn't make you necessarily somebody who will do that all the time or something like that. But, if we just take it at plain value, and then, yes, I've published one of my book, it is what it is. But I do enjoy writing, as a hobby. I do enjoy writing, and I do it fairly often. And at the time, like the only places where I could either express an opinion or write about a certain topic was through these very, very underground small publications that would just like open for submission. And there you go. You would submit a piece, kind of like what you did with the Pillars, like a lot of people are doing. And I was very much a fan of these. I still have they're still literally, I believe, even though I'm all into the very hardcover, beautiful editions now, stamping, whatnot, blah, 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 all these details. I'm still a huge fan of these short runs publications, or more DIY approach, publications and long running journals and whatnot. Just recently, I acquired the great majority of the Aries journal from Brill, from Brill's Academy, and it's I don't know, these series I very much, I think there's a lot of gold in it, and it potentially has to do with the coming together of so many voices around a certain theme. And to me, that was always fascinating. And it felt also, as per the function that I was describing when I first devised Pillars in my mind, well, first, it came about from a need. So the need was I had written a full-on ritual operation that I had laid down to paper, a pretty complex one too, that I just the previous year kind of enacted at various instances, almost also redoing it again at some point. And I wanted to find a home, I guess, to publish this, right? And I couldn't because it was too long. It's too many pages. And so therefore, most small publishers that could have said yes were like, well, if you trunk it down maybe to 1/3 of what it is, or maybe we could make it as a kind of like a recurring. And then again, I had no name, I basically nobody, and that's still the case in my opinion. I mean, and I understand that. I'm not saying this in any derogatory manner. I'm happy to be a publisher, but like I said, I'm not an established author by any means. But at the time, I had this piece and I wanted to do something with it. And more as people were coming to me, kind of expressing their appreciation of other articles that I've written back then, other authors in the milieu or would-be authors or kind of interested or have something to say or good artists and whatnot. It dawned on me that I could literally just start my own project. And I knew from the get-go that because of my graphic designer background, I could do something at least visually interesting with it, right? And pleasing. So now it was just a matter of finding the right format, finding the right paper, trying to find a printer back then that would allow for these small run, because most of the printers I was in contact with the various contact I had at the newspaper were like gigantic, like printing, places that don't do 300 copies of something. You need to do a 5,000 minimum or something, right? And I wanted something that was lavish, and that even though it was going to be relatively cheap a product, because the first few pillars were not expensive at all. Well, certainly not as to the price they're being sold on eBay nowadays, that's for sure. But, like they were pretty cheap, but they were made with such love and such care and attention that I knew it would resonate with the core audience, or the core readership, I should say, sorry. But also you have to take under consideration that very early on, I was like, well, this is a passion of mine. It's not going to pay the rent. I was like, so of course I was at the same time pleasing that sounds bad, pleasing myself. What, but I mean, but I was, I was making something, that I would enjoy. And very early on, that also became somewhat of a guiding force for Anathema, wherein I subtract the entire notion that I'm a unique individual. There's no such thing. There's literally thousands and thousands, if not millions of me out there, and that's a good thing when you're talking about a business standpoint, because you don't need to go into the very minutia of doing public research, to fulfill a specific need, and then do all of these entrepreneurial, very intricate things to start a business. Yes, you can totally do that in the traditional manner, but you can also look at yourself in the mirror and understand what you represent as a potential reader, as a potential customer. And that's how I tackled the whole thing. I was like, well, I would love to stumble upon such a publication, so I'll do it. All right. So, and I guess it worked, because a lot of people very much enjoy the first, issue of Pillars, Psychopompus, that was the name of it, the volume 1, issue 1. And already, I wouldn't say it was a success, but certainly it sold out in what seemed like a very uncanny, a very fast way, back when I was literally selling these almost off my direct Facebook account, almost from person to person like this. And I had I didn't have an actual website. I had a selling platform that was called Free Web Store. So you would go at anathemapublishing.freewebstore.com, and then it was just a plain kind of, okay. So you would, it worked fine, and people seemed to enjoy it, and there was a demand for it, and that led me, of course, to decide, because at first it wasn't even decided it was going to be a yearly thing. It got decided after the fact, and I was like, okay, well, let's make this a yearly periodical then. And yeah, that's kind of the impetus. Now, to answer, I would say, part 2 of that first question that you asked me, if there is a grand vision, it's certainly how Pillars changed my life and my approach to the mysteries, because I was literally bathing in an environment that I had technically created. But it's kind of like, if you, okay, so let's put it this way and say I'm the guy who've put in the brick and mortar to build a school. But what's happening within the school is not just of my own making, but I'm literally present and working on it all the time. So as pillars are, the name of it is Pillars, as pillars are being erected and the foundation becomes stronger, well, so is my understanding of so many things, because I'm inviting people to partake and to contribute, who are much more knowledgeable than I am about all of these things, who have much more to say, who have interesting ways of putting things and views. So I've learned so much through the whole thing that it became both a personal challenge and a place to study, as I'm working. So that's kind of a double whammy of wins. It's just like winning on all sides. It's like it's the perfect scenario, to be honest. And I've always been extremely grateful and thankful to everybody who's contributed to this. And for me, personally, it was weird because I was developing myself as a visionary artist, as also a guy who would have to write the preface, we say, each time, who would have to deepen the mystery on the many points, and who would come up with these themes, who would come up with these ideas. Hey, let's explore this, and just give just the right amount of guidelines for people to potentially take this and interpret it into like a myriad ways. That was very much the whole idea, is to have these different angles and never just one thing. So I mean, I think that's what it's. I mean, to a certain extent, every periodical does that, but I feel that that the more strict and rigid, maybe peer review type of publication, usually you'll read something that'll be consistent into a certain approach to that topic, and it'll be, even though the voices change, it'll still kind of like. But for me, it was very much open to everybody. Yes, more known authors and artists, but also a lot of people actually had their very first article, published within the pages of Pillar, because it wasn't about a hierarchy of who's known. Of course, it's always good to have a few names that will get people to turn their head and pay attention. That's for sure. But for me, it's very much an open space, for people to express their views and their practice. It can be from a more academic perspective, a very dry perspective. It can be from a purely experiential and knee deep, kind of like. I love that. I very much love that. And for me, part of the fun was always to devise these or come up with these themes that are mostly universal, and that every tradition has their say and their angles to explore, So I think that answers part one of your question, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
It's, really insightful as to kind of what the vision was for the series, and then this most recent publication, the Wayfarers Hearth.
Yeah,
because you mentioned travel at the start of, I think before we started recording, but also at the start that there was plans for travel, which became Anathema. But you've had your own travel experiences as well.
Yes. Well, okay. So, really quickly, I'll say one thing, because I think it'll round perfectly with this, is the fact that so even though I had like a vision for Pillars, one thing is certain: each time I was aiming for something in particular, life or that project in and of itself would make it so that it would ensure that this is not precisely how things would go. And I very much came to not fear, but rather embrace that chaos, to a certain extent. And one of the weird things, for instance, whenever I was devising and coming up with a certain idea or theme, it wasn't like, okay, today I need to do this, it's on the schedule, and then I'm writing down a bunch of ideas and picking one up like willy-nilly. Not at all. It would literally be, it would come up during intense periods of practice. It would come up in dreams. It would come up as a very kind of like burst of a spark of inspiration, right? And I would go nuts, and I would start like laying down all the ideas and what that could tie in, a couple of the other things. Anyway, that's always how it is. But also, it's probably a looping mechanism into my own thought processes, wherein usually the theme given for a certain Pillars, because we have a year to make it happen, we have a year to like tell people, hey, this is going to be the theme. Here's how you can contact us. Please send us your material. We have 1 year to get all the material, call it a day, say yes or no to some of the submissions, and then be like, yeah, I believe we have enough material to warrant, publication, and go for it. And then we have a year again to have it produced and delivered and start selling, because otherwise it's no longer an annual periodical. So whenever I would give a theme, that theme would very much paint energically the rest of my year, for good or bad, for good or ill. Trust me, I believe some of them. I do remember like the Golden Ether, like the second volume of Pillars of the second issue, I should say, of the first volume, which was about the golden poison, or the kind of like the aspect of gnosis, which are intoxicating but can be damaging, if you lose yourself into it to a certain extent. And also the whole notion of the poison is the medicine and the medicine is the poison type of things, Ouroboros, you get it. Anyway, all of this, oh my goodness, was that year a roller coaster, that would kind of like very much underline with the bold pen, scratching the paper of just how much I was into the deep of that theme, living it in my life. It would reflect in so many ways, even though it had nothing to do with, the necessary, like the contribution coming my way necessarily, but certainly it would inform how things were happening. Like I have so many anecdotes, but yeah, that would be too long. But each of them have been the case, so much so that sometimes I would become, once this has been running for like 7 8 years now. And whenever I was being mindful of this, and last year's theme, the Seeds of Aries, was devised and had to do with difficult relationship, had to do with clash, had to do with struggle, had to do with, fairly and quote unquote negatives, and I don't know, there was a part of me that was like, okay, this might bring in conflict, and we just entered the pandemic at the very same time, like basically a couple of months after we announced, the theme for that year's project, and it manifested into many ways, and that after a while that can become exhausting. And then it also makes you respect, kind of like the more Martian, aspect of that particular theme was really about like uphill battle the entire way through and the entire year, and I'm talking about like loss of loved ones, I'm talking about a lot of things, which again, you can choose to look in a symbolic manner, or you can choose to relegate everything to just anecdotes and just like, kind of like chance, or something like that. But for me, like looking at the world in a symbolic manner, like I see the correlation, and it actually helps me grow as an individual. And a Wayfarer's Hearth, to come to this one, well, arcing back, yes, to how Anathema started in the first place. And the thing is, it's like through various such interviews as we're doing right now, I already did mentioned this story before, but I'll do it quickly for the sake of this one. But I did answer this how Anathema started, this question in various interviews, but I never made any plans to write it down, as a piece, as something. And then again, when it dawned on me that maybe it would be the proper time to go back on this and reflect through all the years of Pillars, but Anathema in general, and where it seemingly started, well, it started with a couple of traveling experiences. I was like, all right. And also, I should say, and this is very important, there's a few people, namely Kazim and Gloria Dini. There was a couple of people that pitched ideas for Seeds of Aries, for last year's Pillars, that were not so that were kind of out of place with the theme at the time. There were good pieces, and there were pieces I was considering, but I even had a hard time legitimately kind of like justifying their inclusion in Seas of Aries. So I was like, that would work well though for a more travel experience, type of pillars. And then I was like, well, there you go. That could be it. But also with that thing that I had in mind, which is that a certain theme of pillars colors the year into which I'm working on it. I knew it would come as a relief of sort, because I used to love traveling so much. And like I said, like in passing, I used to do it for a living when I was part of bands and touring all the time. I started traveling on my own quite early, not as a young one, because we had no money. I come from a very humble background, let's just put it this way. But my single mother, 3 kids, we had no money to travel the world, that's for sure. I think we went to Florida once, and that was about it. But yeah, on my own though, with a backpack, sleeping in cemeteries, my first travel experience was around 18, 19, wherein, I went for like a month and a half to Corsica in France, and I was all excited, to go see Carcassonne and the Qatar's country, amazing time. And, after that, I toured for years. And then when I started making quote unquote good money with the career that I had, the soonest I could get out of Canada and just go travel, I would do so. So I went to Spain, and when I did plan for like a close to 4 months trip in Asia Minor, that's around the time that Anathema came together, like in my mind. And since that point on, because I started Anathema, and because I decided to pour literally blood, sweat, and tears, but also soul and money, into that project, that would maybe what was it? I started in 2011, and around 2017, so like 6 years after the fact, I quit my career. I quit the day job to go fully into Anathema as a full-time endeavor and project. So during all that time, I took the money that I would otherwise put on travel, and I decided to put it into the company and see how it would pay off, so to speak, or, because I wanted this baby of mine, sort of quote unquote, to kind of like grow and be healthy. And so I was reinvesting everything all the time in the company. And I kind of needed the relief that would come with a theme that would explore these wonderful cross-cultural experiences and these unique moments that you can have when you're away from home, and that you have to understand yourself, your beingness, your raison d'être, and understand that this hearth that I'm talking about isn't fixed to one place. It's following you all the time. It's literally wherever you go, wherever you're with, like appearances in this way, like become completely inseparable from the beingness aspect. And that to me was always fascinating, right? Because I got to understand and have glimpses of that, wherein I would literally fall into trance and into meditative states whilst away, wherein I would literally start envisioning what were my parallel lives as I'm talking to you right now. What would be what is literally Gabriel in universe B and C and D and, up until infinities living right now? Is he married? Is he still in Laos? That literally, like, there's so many of these little questions. So for me, I knew I had something to say about that. I knew it could make for an interesting preface, so that in and of itself was interesting. Also for the fact that I was interested into recording some aspects of that travel, that specific travel in Asia that I made in 2011. And so it would be a way to record this. And I was deeply, deeply interested into traveling through other people's experiences and other through people's pieces and texts and images and, all of that good stuff. Literally also, at last minute, I remember I had this conversation with my copy editor, Evan, who's I work with, a couple of copy editors as well who help me review and have a much better English than I do. So that's, you need to put the money where money is needed. So, but he's a very cool guy, a good friend of mine as well. And we were just discussing back and forth, because a couple of years ago, I was like, I would want you to be more present and help me more with pillars as well, to kind of like help me manage it more, because it's very difficult to manage pillars whilst other things are happening. Other publications are being worked on and whatnot. Like when I started talking about the project and how, we would potentially have maybe one or two pieces already because of the pieces I had to say no to, from Kazim. And he was like, yeah, that's a really good idea. But the funny part was like, we're all in pandemic mode. Nobody's traveling right now, or at least, not into a serious, or not as much, or, or not everybody can, depending on which country you're in. And I was like, wow, this is it's quite unfortunate. And at the same time, maybe like I'm not the only one who would like to read about, remember that amazing time when we could travel and go meet people and, be surrounding by these Geni Loki and go travel places of power and have these wonderful experiences, these human experiences as well. Right. And, not just spiritual, but it's so I was like, maybe I'm not the only one who would like to read about that. But if one thing is certain, I was kind of very meta in my way of introducing that theme, because I was like, so I'm going to sell a book that speaks about alchemically transformative experiences and spiritual experiences traveling the world, but you're going to travel through the texts within a book that I'm selling. So there was layers to that meta, because I was like, well, people could also submit about how they travel via their book collections, how they travel through the written word, right? And as book collector myself, and as I'm sure you are, and as it seems to be the case for a lot of our readers, for a lot of Anathema's readers, it certainly is indeed something they do. And some people are not fortunate into being able to travel. Could be health related, could be anything, right? And often they do travel experientially up to a certain point via text and via books. And I was like, wow, this is kind of like a cool meta idea to kind of like introduce in there. And I was like, well, so I'm going to leave it like that. And people have carte blanche to either tackle, here's what happened in 1999 when I went to this place, or here's me, how I developed and how I travel, via my book collection and as a bibliographer or something like that, as is the case with, say, the piece from Kim, the bibliosophist, which is an amazing piece. And it's about, taking care of books, but actually it ties in perfectly with the theme. So yeah, I very much like devising these themes that have like at least a semblance of dual edge, if not even more, but kind of like something, there's kind of like a sous-entendu, comme on dit en français, an underlayer of meaning, So that's kind of how it came about. And that's why also even the title, there's always like a paradox in every title from Anathema. There's always a paradox. So like the seeds of Aries, how can a seed grow in a battlefield? Wayfarers Hearth, we're talking about a heart, we're talking about home, we're talking about sitting by the fireplace and a coziness, and then again, we're talking about a wayfarer, which we that can harken to the wandering hermit, figure, like in the rain on a pilgrimage somewhere. It's always the case with circling the compass was exactly that. I was interested into notion of the circle in a magical setting and notion of the compass from a traditional craft setting, and also how these are somewhat related to one another and yet very different. So there's always like something like that. I very much like to play on these, and the careful or discerning reader will always find hidden things also, because I must say I've hidden quite a lot of contents in these, but not everybody like has the eye to decipher or understand, but it is a particular pleasure of mine to introduce these little hidden details in there.
Well, thank you, Gabriel. I think that's a lovely place to wrap up the conversation. It's been really interesting talking to you about your journey, and the work is great, you know, and your publications are fantastic. I had the pleasure of talking to Veronica a few weeks ago.
Oh, really? Awesome.
About her work, which is again phenomenal. So yeah, thank you very much. And in terms of listeners, if they want to look at Anathema's books,
I can show you, but I don't think this is going to be back. Look, I just received the paperback reissue of my book.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah. That was sold out since 2018.
Yeah.
So I just received it last Friday. It's not even available yet on the website. I still need to create the product page and all of that. But yeah, so I do, of course, I do contribute. It's just like my work always takes us. What's the term? It always takes not precedence, like the opposite of precedence, but I always take a step back with my own work.
Okay.
To put on the priority on other people's book and ideas for book. It's not because I don't want to. The whole limelight. Like I told you prior to us starting the recording that. It's very difficult for me to still be somewhat, to a certain extent, the face of my company, just because by default I'm the only employee or the only person working on every little aspects of the company, from the most boring accounting parts to the most amazing, interesting parts, which is like good developing relationship. But nonetheless, and I do write and I do. But it takes me forever because I'm so overwhelmed with work and it's so demanding. And I'm at peace with the fact that as a publisher, I need to be a link in a great chain of knowledge, you know, and I want to make my contribution publishing these beautiful pieces of art and these relevant in order for the esoteric mysteries and the occult and whatever you want to call it, in order for it to continue from that point on, and not always kind of like, and I don't say that in a dismissive way, but the age-old grimoires are interesting, and they always will be, and they have their place, and a new more accurate transcription of the Nagamadi library is of course always welcome, you know, and please, I'll be the one to buy it, you know, but as I did with all the other versions, including the Brill edition that costs an arm and a leg. But you know, like so yes, like these are amazing, but there needs to be new content. There needs to be new people involved in the conversation, and having them being published in a sumptuous manner that harkens back to the craft of bookmaking, and to have a vessel for the text, for the content that respects the content. You know, like that to me is very important. That was that marriage I was talking to you about. That was very much my goal when I started this. But nonetheless, these are limited editions, and people who are interested in my work, I would say they don't need to follow my Instagram at all. Else they're interested into music or board games, but or anything, or sometimes yes, books as well. But mainly, I would say, they can buy the book. If they're interesting into reading what I have to say, Ororai is the first book I've been working on, and it took me 10 years of polishing and rewriting and whatnot. It's an alchemical journey, taking you through the various kind of like 4 color gradation of the work. And it's a beautiful presentation by the artist Jose Gabriel Alegria Sabogal, who's like a freaking master at his craft. Like, it's uncanny, but we worked together closely on this one. So he illustrated the book profusely. There's parts of poetry in there. There's philosophical ramblings. There's prayers. There's devotional work. There's rituals. There's a lot of stuff. Cool. And I'm working on a follow-up book. I've been working on it for a couple of years now, but I have no idea when this is going to come out, because I'm always working on other things.
I know the feeling. It's hard to kind of be nailed down on one thing. I should add as well that like I do some like digital, like experiential projects, like art projects as well. So I have to kind of always caveat this to when I kind of liberally shit on social media, it is not technology in its whole. Digital and technology is very, very useful. It's just a tool. It depends what you use it for.
Exactly.
Now, with the caveat done, Gabriel, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for
Likewise.
your time.
Hey, thank you so much, man.
Awesome. Great, I hope you all enjoyed that. Many thanks to Gabriel for coming on the show. If you're interested in your own copy of A Wayfarer's Hearth, then do check the show notes for everything we discussed today. And you can pick up your own copy because I believe they sell out quite quickly. Right, that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm Dara Mason and you've been listening to The Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon. Bye.